Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks with another look at Kontour. So I'm just going to dive right into this because there's a lot to talk about. And this video, we're going to be looking at the 4 macro controls within the synth. And they are definitely key to sound design in Kontour. They really help bring sounds to life, which is why I think it's a good idea to spend a whole video looking at them because there's a lot going on with them. So I'm going to try to cover as much as I can, as quickly as I can, and also keep it concise and making sense. But you get 4 macro controls, and I think the best way to look at them and what they do, so you'll see all these things jumping up and down right now on different parameters in Kontour. Well, what they're doing is it's a predefined snapshot, basically, of modulation destinations. So instead of being able to freely modulate any source in the synth, kind of like Massive, these 4 macros are tied to a host of parameters. So if you push play, if you push plus, let's just turn the plus on right now, you'll see that this ring is green, the plus is green, and you'll see all these green highlights come up within Kontour. All right, if you do this for color 1, purple's going to highlight. So there's all these purple parameters that are highlighted, and so forth with the other 2 macros. Well, what that's showing you is those are all the destinations that the drama control is tied to within Kontour. Now, I found this really cool. I could see some people thinking this is limiting, but I find it a really musical approach to modulating and macroing sounds because sometimes it can get overwhelming and you don't know where to start. And if you have too many options, that can be a bad thing in music production. But so if you click on the plus to the drama macro, you're going to see there's 11 different destinations that are highlighted. Well, they are the sustains of both your envelopes, the mix output of your cabinet, the depth rate and mix of the flanger effect, and the mix of echo and reverb. So I look at the drama control as a way to make your sounds more dynamic, both spatially and to add some movement into them. You're going to be able to do things that are basically LFO type effects with all of the macro controls because of how they're set up on this page A here, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I kind of look at it as just making things a little bit more dynamic. And there's also these controls for the feedback loops for both the comb filter and state variable filter, as well as the FX. So it can really gritty up a sound, the drama control can. And I have a bass patch pulled up, and if I just play it without the macro controls on, if I turn on the drama macro, you can see that movement. So really cool thing. It's pretty easy to set up. It doesn't take a lot of know-how. You just kind of tweak things. But let's move on to the color 1 macro, which is this purple one here. And I have it activated, and here's the sound that I'm playing with it. So it can control up to 12 different targets within Kontour. And I look at this more as the way to really sculpt and effect the synth engine section because it has a lot of parameters you can use. It also has some things going on in the filtering stage of Kontour, but not as much as the color 2 macro has. If I turn that on real quick, you'll see that there are more options to kind of modulate the filter section with color 2 as opposed to color 1. But going back to color 1 for now, you get the first thing you see is the PM self, and that is the amount of the phase modulation by the oscillator and shaper A, so it's like a local feedback source. And then PMB is the amount of the phase modulation of oscillator and shaper B. So you have to be using your second oscillator and shaper B for that to have an effect on the sound. And then you get this drive for shaper A, and that's just the amount of gain coming through basically the drive and the shaper. And moving kind of left to right here, because these are all the same ideas for both oscillator A and oscillator B. You get moving to the comb filter here. You have the comb filter A and B, which is the input signal of the comb filter. It's a crossfade signal as opposed to which one's coming in, either oscillator and shaper A or oscillator and shaper B. And then next you get this AP tune here, and the AP tune is you can look at it like a 2-pole all-pass filter, and it's going to kind of actually tune your sound via semitones. So if I turn this off, let me turn this off so you can hear what that does. We turn down the state filter. So you can hear it's adding frequency constant to it. It's definitely not the same as like tuning the pitch in the oscillators or actually here, but it's adding some either low frequency pitches or some high frequency pitches to kind of round things out. So that's what that is doing, and I've talked about that in the last video where I'm discussing the filters. And then you also get the cutoff of your state variable filter, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's just modulating between the cutoff amount, the gain of the cutoff of your filter. All right, let's move on to color 2. If you turn that on right now, the sound's gonna get real crazy. So I've noticed that this is one of the easiest ways to do actually vibrato in Kontour, because you have this pitch of both your oscillators, so you can set it up to kind of create some simple and easy vibrato, because there's not necessarily a vibrato control here in Kontour like in some synths. So that is how I've been doing it. But let's talk about the different options you get for color 2. There are a total of 12 targets again with the color 2 macro. And let's discuss what they are and kind of what they do. So as I mentioned when I was talking about the color 1, this one definitely has a lot of weight with the filtering section. So keep that in mind as you're using this. But in the oscillator section, you get this pitch, both this pitch macro, and this is controlling, it's basically going to be like a vibrato or an LFO effect with pitch. And then you get the mix output of both the shapers. So that's going to add some distortion, drive, and some harmonic content. The bulk of everything is happening here in the comb filter. And what you get in the comb filter is, first thing you get, let's talk about the AP Reso real quick. So in that, let's turn this up. So we turn the pitch off for this. So if you double click these controls, they'll go back to 0. So let me go to page A real quick and turn the rate down for this because it's crazy. Alright, so the AP Reso is going to affect the resonance of the there's a 2-pole all-pass filter going on. Think of going on behind this knob here. So it's going to determine how steep the phase shift is rising around the center frequency of that 2-pole all-pass filter. Alright, and then let's go on to the comb filter decay. This is the amount of internal feedback. And if you crank this all the way up, you get those kind of creepy, terrible noises. So that's why those high-pitched beeps were happening kind of towards the end and release of when I was letting up. So if I turn this rate down, you should get a little better sense of what's going on. So let me turn the decay up. So you can do some really crazy effects with that decay. And then this high cut here is the cutoff frequency of the low pass filter in the comb filter. So you can see how the sound's getting crazy, just with some slight tweaks to that. So let's go down to the state variable filter now and talk about those destinations and parameters. You get the resonance, which is just a standard resonance control for a filter. It's pretty normal because you have low pass, band pass, and high pass filter types for this filter. And then you have this spread here. The spread's a unique one. This is the offset between the cutoffs of the 2-pole filters. And it's kind of used to get like a good nasally resonance peak going. Alright, and then one of the coolest controls I would say within the color 2 macro is this one right here. And I talked about in depth in the last video what's going on with this LBH. This is kind of an independent filter control, where most synths you get either you can select for a filter, you can select low pass, band pass, or high pass, and you might have two filters to choose from, so you might do a low pass in one and a band pass in another. But this one you can freely slide between them, so you'll see L, B, and H. L is all the way down, so this is acting as a low pass filter right now. So if I turn this cutoff up, I turn up my state filter a little more. So if I crank this up here, let's go to color 2, and I'll turn that up and turn this on. So that's how you can affect the cutoff of that. But if we are just talking about this idea of this L, B, and H, well, right now it's on low pass, and as I turn this up and I get to the middle is a band pass. And if I go all the way to the right, it's a high pass. So the cutoff knob will function in correlation to whether it's high pass, low pass, or band pass. But the cool thing is this middle ground between those three options, right? So I can be right here, and right now I'm probably like 85% leaning towards a low pass, but part of it's going towards a band pass. And that's what's cool, is I can modulate between the two. As opposed to, so you can take that idea with the high pass, it's actually a cool sound, but it's kind of dirty. But so if I modulate this and I turn this on now, so let me turn this down and this down. And then if I go to this page, you can see it's really cool. You can get some crazy cool results. I'll turn this rate down, right? And then that's a really cool way to kind of have different wobbles, different parts of your sounds take on whole different filter types, which is why I love this kind of variable slider here with this in the state variable filter. Moving on to the final macro, it's this loudness macro. And the loudness macro is going to be something that you're going to want to use to kind of change different internal elements of the synth engine and the outputs of them. So this controls 9 different targets, so it has the least amount of targets of the 4 macros, but it can still do some crazy things to your sound. So I have it on right now, but I don't have anything affected or really going on, being modulated. But going from left to right again, you'll notice that when you turn it on, the envelope shapes go away, and you get this box now that says level range. And that is kind of a cool thing. What it's doing is it's basically influenced the level of envelope A, which is controlling the ADS or the ADB-DSR of your oscillator and shaper A. So that's one way that you can make that have more influence if you have some cool shapes or you're modulating some different sections of, let's say with, go back to the drama control. Let's say I end up modulating the sustain of envelope A and I don't of envelope B. And my mix and A and B are the same for the sound. Well, to make the envelope A, which I modulated hypothetically with the sustain, what I can do is turn the level range up for envelope A because it'll be a little bit more prominent than envelope B. Going down to this level, you get the level of the cabinet, which is going to, it essentially controls the output of the saturation amount. And then let's go over to this other side of Kontour where you get mix. So you have mix A, B, C, and S. A is correlating to oscillator and shaper A. B is the mix output of oscillator and shaper B. And then you have this C and S. C is the amount of the comb filter that you're hearing, and S is the amount of the state variable filter that you are hearing. And let's go down to the shaper real quick. So shaper drive is the input gain of basically the sine shaper distortion effect. And then you have the level of that as well. So that kind of rounds out what's going on with the loudness. If I play around with some of these controls real quick. So you can see that it still has a very cool effect to the sound. All right, so now that we've covered all 4 of the macro controls and what their different target and assignments, let's actually talk about what and how you can change what's going on with those macros. So when you click on this little A tab here, this brings up, it's still a macro control, but it brings up the motion recorder, which is the heart and soul of what's going on with those 4 macros that we've already talked about. So if I click on, right now I have it set to this color 1, you'll see this whole screen appear with basically a waveform, and you can load up any waveform you want. So you can have, this is a saw wave, you have these different presets. It looks a lot like Razor actually. But when you hit play, what's going to happen now, let me turn this to, let me unsync this. We select it. So you'll see now that when I go back to this this B view where the whole synth's in plain sight, see how that's moving? Well, when I said before at the start of the video, we'll talk about why they move the way that they do. It's because it's tied to this waveform here in this motion recorder. So if I hold down this note, you'll see it moves across these different sections of this preset, this waveform, accordingly. You can loop it. So you have all these different controls that can basically set up different movements and feelings and just intensities of the effect. And I want to talk about those real quick. So let's just keep it on color 1 right now. You'll see the first thing you get here is in the motion recorder, you'll see that you'll get this scale. In playback mode, this is the output signal of the recorder. And to put that in more layman's terms, if you turn this down to 0, there's very little effect, right? So for pads and things like that, just having this on a little bit will help make things more interesting and dynamic. But if you turn the scale up, it's turning up the amplitude, basically, of the waveform shape. Turn this down. All right, and the offset in playback mode is the output signal of the recorder, and it can be shifted by pretty much, this amount. So if I turn this down, if I turn the offset down to -0.50, crazy effect. Let's crank it up to 0.50. So I kind of look at that as, to put it more in layman's or musical terms, if you want a really, really crazy effect, turn it up or down a lot, and it will basically make things get crazy. Let's talk about this steps function real quick, and by default it's off, so if you can double click it and it'll turn it on to 16 steps. Or, let me turn it off again, you can just drag it downwards and it'll be at 32 steps. That's how you can activate it. And then to turn it off, double clicking it will just take it to 16 steps. So what you do is just click and drag up with your mouse, and all the way past 32 it'll turn back off. But if it's at 32 steps, it's kind of like Massive's stepper. It's a sample and hold function, and it is creating a stepped curve form instead of kind of a smooth, general, virtual analog like saw or sine wave shape. So if I take one of those, let's take sine and turn on steps, you can see that it's actually going to be stepping up these different points, and you can choose how many you want. You can choose from 2 all the way to 32. And let's go on to, let me turn this back off. Let's go on to this section right here. You get this smooth and swing function, which is pretty cool. So this will actually play nicely with the steps, but if you have the smooth off, you can see that the steps look kind of like really rudimentary waveforms. If you start to smooth things out, you still have the step function, but what it's doing is it's smoothing out the amount of the sample hold effect that you're gonna hear. If you start to bring the smooth up past around, I'd say about halfway, it basically just starts to look like the shape again without the steps on. Swing is going to, it's like every swing function, especially with the step, it's going to add some swing, some grooviness to what's happening with the motion recorder and the modulation. All right, so let's go down to the bottom section here where you're going to see the first thing that you'll see is this key. This determines if the MIDI note on will influence the playback. So it's basically like a restart function. If you're coming from massive, think of it like restart via gate. See how it comes back. If I have this off, this just keeps going. So if you want it to restart every time you play a new note. So this multi-tab right after key will basically allow you to play multiple notes at once, and it will restart the starting position, allowing you to play polyphonically on your keyboard. Now this loop point here, this will set up, you see these S, L, and R controls that you get. Well, this is your starting point, so you can have it start here, like back here, I'll play a note. See how it starts by the S, right? And then once it gets to the L and R, it'll just loop back and forth between that until I let up again. And then you have this sync button. This is basically your time section of what's going on within the motion recorder. You can have it sync to beat values, or you can have it to rate. And then you have a copy and paste if you draw in and make some cool waveforms and you want to move those between the different macros, you can. So that pretty much covers everything, or a good chunk, I hope, about the macro section within Kontour. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you have not checked out ADSR Sounds yet, head on over there. Tons of great things, synthesizer and production related. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.